In this session, we discuss the impacts of working in a broken system, the experience of a developing career, and the role of communal care. Welcome to the After Podcast. I am Naveed Zamani and I'm your host. In this session, I'm excited to be speaking with Dr. Mariana Juras. Dr. Mariana Juras is a Brazilian native couples and family psychologist, currently serving as an assistant professor in the PsyD Clinical Psychology Doctoral Program at Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne, Florida. Dr. Juras' research interests are broad, and her scholarly agenda includes family and cultural matters in clinical and forensic psychology. Back home in Brazil, she provided services in the family courts of Brasilia from 2007 to 2016 in child custody and domestic violence cases. Mariana, it's so good to have you. Thank you for being here and spending some time with me. I'm asking interviewees for a story about a time in their clinical practice that they feel they failed and what they learned.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. I mean, I'm a great fan of your work and this work on the podcast, listening, and it's just a great opportunity to share as well.
Well, thank you.
I've been thinking about that question and just also wanted to notice that English is my second language. And even though I have been in this country for the past 10 years, I'm still active bilingual. So, sometimes the words are kind of, come differently. But I've been thinking a lot about this question for the past months since we have trying, to find a time to meet. And I think it's such an important question, and especially for early career, mid-career, So I would say from a mid-career perspective, right? From having had, and in Brazil, it's a little different, even though I completed my PhD in 2016, back home in Brazil, similar in many other countries, the psychology degree or the psychology licensure, we complete that in 5 years in very similar structure, but it's in the undergrad level. So I did my undergrad in psychology, were able to provide services, did my master's, doctoral, So I've been, working in the field for quite a while, I would say. So, but my experience mostly, especially clinically, has been back home in Brazil. So I've been thinking about that question, not only personally, not only maybe individual instances that I might have faced in my professional career that were challenging, but I'm thinking, and I was, keep coming back to the same moments. And for me, were moments that led to me a shift in my career trajectory, I would say. Even, for instance, one of the reasons coming to this country and immigrating, kind of shifting, a lot or tremendous what I thought I was going to be doing. So I just wanted to bring more of that, those moments and specific instances, not necessarily as failures, personal failures, but mostly I think, and I was thinking more in depth, I think this reflects more failures maybe towards the profession or failures of the system, right? When the system is broken, right? And when we face this, not things that, I'm learning as a person, but also, encountering those barriers within the system has been really impactful for me. So I can bring a specific case that was one of the reasons that, I can recall that being of the highest point of, really shifting things for me. And this was a case in the forensic court. So at that time, I was doing forensic interviews for children that has been suspected of sexual assault. So similar than here.
This is in Brazil.
Yes, in Brazil. Yeah, but similar. So, and that, legal systems are a little different, but somewhat mostly similar. I would say when it comes to, even though, here's common law, there's civil law, I would say like the system structure is kind of similar. So here I was with this case of this teen adolescent girl coming to I don't know if the word is testify, but she was coming in a protective setting to be interviewed about the events of sexual assault, to narrate of the narratives of what happened, right, as a piece of evidence for the criminal prosecution. And this was in early stages. So, and it's interesting as well, because in Brazil, in this case in particular, it seemed, at least when I entered the situation, I anticipated being one of the best situations I have ever been, in terms of the best situations that could be, because this was one of the best judges. The prosecutor was one of the best prosecutors in that context. Being trained with him, so I knew that he was awesome, one of the best. This victim was assisted by a lawyer as well, which is not common to have. In Brazil, was not a requirement, but she also had. So we had, of course, the defense lawyer, attorney, but also the victim attorney, which was not usual or common. So I came, and again, a teenager. It was the evidence was, so in Brazil, we had this most, every time trying to protect best the children. It's a great different, we were just acting on this new legislation that has passed recently at that time, of what we say prova antecipada, which is translates to an evidence being anticipated. So even before, all the process, this is like that would be in the investigation phase in the police station. It was already bringing to the courts to avoid and prevent multiple narratives, right? Multiple times. So that was the first time that this teenager was sharing in a recorded in an evidence base in an evidence setting that situation. So everything was at least anticipated to be working great until systems of failures was one of the most horrible cases that I witnessed, that I was participating in terms of how the system was handling it. So there was constant errors. And I can narrate a little bit more. So this teenager was coming to the court for the first time. She has never, talked about this either in the police station, anywhere. This was the first time that she was coming to share and talk about what happened. Teenager, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, on a situation involving her grandfather, and the grandfather was there. So it started there, right? Because
in the room?
No, not in the room. He was in the courtroom, in the hearing room.
Okay.
And I was with her in a separate room.
Okay.
But somehow I think they still lived in the same house. I don't know how, but there was like no restrictive orders in place at the time. So she came, sat with me, and she said, "I'm afraid I cannot talk about it because he lives with me. Can I talk? Can I speak to the judge?" And she said, yeah. And I called the judge, and she said, yes, come in. So so they outside, so they removed the offender who was, so she went to the court room to talk to the judge and shared that she didn't feel safe. And the judge said, I can provide you with the protective orders for him to be restrained and not have any contact with you. And she said, okay, so I can talk. So came back, talked to me, described in details many instances, not only with her, but with many other victims as well, extensively of what happened. Yeah. Towards the end of it, I was, trying to, close the situation and close the interview. One of the closures that we do is to, just especially to check on the safety, right, of her. This is this girl that have shared so much, and it's going back home. And I went back to the judge and asked, what about the protective order? Is that in the hearing, notes? And the judge said, oh, No, I forgot. I mean, no, there's no need for that because this, this person or this, grandfather, because he'd seemed very debilitating. He's not going to do anything with her.
Oh,
And
wow.
and that for me was like the first shock in terms of you promised her
Mm.
something. This is one of the best judges that we had. You promised her and you didn't follow through. And
Yeah.
also the prosecutor could also have been, or the victim's attorney. I mean, nobody enforced or made an actual formal decision into that. So she was going to go back home with her grandfather
Wow.
that was hearing everything that she has said. So just think about the risk of that. And I just panicked at that time and said, no, she cannot go home. Oh, so what she needs to do now is she needs to go back to the defense with her attorney to request formally with her mother. And then it was like a complete
Like a whole
mess.
bureaucratic set of requirements.
A complete mess. And that because if they were still because they have ended the session, so after the interview they ended the session. And if it's in and everybody like went back home, right? It went back to their offices. So it was even was not possible to add anything because the judge cannot do that by herself. It would have to be motivated by either parties, right, on the process. So of course she couldn't do anything else. So
Wow.
that case for me was what started like a spiral of personal suffering, right? In terms of, I think what I've learned and what I'm still learning, right? I think, especially when I think it's developmentally appropriate, right, for younger clinicians or young adults to think about the ideal or bringing this idealism perspective, right, towards the profession, and that's when I think was a different, really hard for me to reconcile, right?
Right.
There's this, what it could be, what it is, what really could be potentially because all the tools were there. It's not even that they were not there because I mean I faced cases that everything was disassembled, so it's easier kind of I would say to accept, which is horrible to say, but this is a case and everything was, all the resources were in place, and even so we failed tremendously to protect this teenager, right? So I think that was really hard for me to accept, to reconcile. And after that, it became really hard to sustain, even
Oh,
to sustain a practice, I would say, within this context. So that's when I kind of shift a little bit more towards less forensic and especially in cases of, domestic violence, especially when involving children in terms of how of course, not trying to generalize, right? I think there are great things being done, and I also don't want to reduce that, but also to acknowledge that there's still some fractures, some, failures, I would say, within the systems that are really hard to navigate.
yeah.
So I just wanted to, to bring some of that as our conversation.
Oh, Mariana, I mean, there's so many points of connection in your story for me. If it's okay for me, like reflect briefly on some of that, because I mean, off the bat, I was thinking about some of kind of I've heard Vicki Reynolds kind of say this about that while sometimes we're kind of led to believe or convinced society that burnout comes from clients, but it's often from these institutions that you kind of have hopes for or need to do some important work and critically fail to do so. Um, and it stands out to me the ways that you're describing that, like this, everything was set up to be so perfect. And even in that context, there was such a tremendous failing. And that tremendous failing in this story, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, housed in kind of commitments that weren't kept, uh, people being referred to different processes and bureaucratic things that like really aren't feasible or just in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
Makes me think of like my relationship out here, at least in San Diego, with child welfare services, where I remember when I first started to join these what's called like CFT meetings, which I actually don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's basically where they if there's been a removal or someone's in a case, they'll bring everyone to the table, right? So this all sounds really good. The foster parent will be there, the therapist, the caseworker, typically the supervisor, the caseworker. In my context, there's interpreters often because of the families I'm working with. And it seems like it's like very collaborative spirit. But you walk in there and the hierarchy is very clear. Who's making the decisions is very clear. The
Hmm.
voices at the bottom are not, well, it's the family who's being affected in that
Yeah.
hierarchy.
Yeah.
Um, and they're like horrifically, there's a lot of suffering in being in those meetings and watching how they play out. But everything's quote unquote set up to be collaborative and
Right.
perfect.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't know, as you were describing, I was remembering myself being in those
Yeah.
meetings, being like,
Yeah.
"Oh wow, this is not what I thought it would be."
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point in terms of, how many actors were present that missed, and especially like the power dynamic, especially within the forensic setting, right? I think you're bringing, even though that might have some practices or that tries to bring an ideal of collaboration, right? This is a circle, it's a circle table, all have equal voices. We know that they don't have equal
Right.
voices, right? We know that, the family, the psychologist, the mental health, the system, they ultimately lack. So it's really about power, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes there's these universalized approaches. Because you're to your point, I can really appreciate this because, I think we have a lot of crossover in our work, especially in the domestic violence context, and then the intersection that has with the legal systems. Um, yeah, and just ways that whenever I have to talk about this, I do need to qualify what I'm saying in the same ways that you did, which is I don't want to generalize, and there are people that are served by this, and I don't want to like kind of like totally dismiss the system, but also, gosh, the system is failing a lot of people.
Yeah. 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 And that's kind of my, I would say what has been broken in me as well is my belief in the justice from those systems, right? Which I think it's not only from what I've heard, but from what I experienced, right, and from what I've seen, and how can I repair that trust, right? And I don't think it's only needs to come from me, right? It's I was also failed. And even though I've tried and I've reached out to later, some of those actors to kind of understand better what
Mhm.
happened, and which one of those assisted. So for instance, the prosecutor later in a meeting that I had with him to kind of process that, because what happened,
Right,
just
right.
I had a lot of I had a lot of faith on you, and he told me, which was somewhat repaired, I would say. He said that her he did not request, or I would say remind, or he didn't impose the restrictive order, was because he thought it was not enough. He was petitioning for arrest for him,
I
and
see.
he thought that would be more effective. But he knew that, and that's when you think about the strategies within the forensic system, right? That
Right,
fails the families.
right,
The strategies of this game, this power game, was that if there was a restrictive order, the judge would think that putting him in jail, incarcerating him, would be way too much, a waste,
right,
if that was in place, which helped me kind of understand also kind of the cracks. And of course, I'm not a legal I'm not, even though I have some understanding of the legal system, that has not necessarily been my training, right?
right, right.
So I kind of, so I think that's also maybe speaks to this interdisciplinary world, right? In terms of we're trained in one area, and other areas that, again, we might have also some lack of understanding in terms of how the systems operates. But even, even when knowing that, it's really hard for me to accept or to, accept reality as is, right? And that has been something that I've been trying to learn,
Mm.
to bring less suffering to me, which, I think you pointed a good point of the burnout, right? For sure, it was a burnout experience to me that really also was one piece of motivation for me to come here, to kind of, change a little that trajectory and think of other things as well in another country, maybe with other, with other types of systems, but also recognizing that anywhere we'll go, those systems will also show those fractures to us, and we will burn out, right? And anticipating or expecting burnout. Maybe that's something, another learning that I had.
Mm.
What are the things that we need to be doing, right, together as a community? And not, I also expect an individual self-care, right? That the burnout will be prevented by one person doing what they need to be doing in isolation, right? So
Right.
I've been a huge after that, also, it became much more clear to me the importance of communal care,
Mm.
and bringing more of this idea that burnout is not, it's not an if, it's a when that will happen in our profession, right? So it's not, and also it doesn't necessarily talks that we are weak, right? But that we will be exposed as humans to so many layers of challenges that are really hard to accept.
Yeah, I really appreciate Mariana, and let me know if I'm kind of capturing some of this correctly. That as your belief in the justice system was broken, that one of the ways that you started to kind of like shift your thinking, if I'm hearing you right, is one kind of in this place of like anticipating burnout, and in that like, well, what am I doing in that anticipation? And also the critical importance of communal care in the face of like a system that, while has a lot of people involved, isolates the people involved. And then I don't know if this is going too far off with it, so let me know. But I'm thinking about some writing by Michael White where he talks about then we're invited to consider all that systemic failure as personal failures. I wonder too, Mariana, because you said this was like a pretty seminal moment in your career where you kind of had a big shift. What followed? What happened after this belief was
Yes,
broken?
yes. I think that's a great question as well. After that, it was really hard to go back to Brazil, not only for this situation, right, but for my work, for, also for after we have an experience of immigration for 1 year. And that was my plan, to stay here for 1 year, go back.
Hmm.
But I wasn't expecting for me to change or have changed so much. It wasn't, I changed, my perspective changed. What I was paying attention to changed tremendously, right? Those things about culture that when you start looking at the water, it becomes a little bit more clear to you what cultural differences
Hmm.
and what was hard for me also to, continuing dealing with back home. So even though, of course, Brazil, and I'm still committed to my Brazilianness and to my people and to, I also thought there was another seminal moment to me, how, because I felt that I was coming here, I felt like a betrayer. I was betraying my country. I was
Hmm.
betraying my people, especially since I have, in Brazil, it's different, but all of my higher education was paid by the public. It was free of tuition. So I have access to so much knowledge, to
Mm-hmm.
so much growth, and I needed to give back to my people, right?
Right.
So that sense of commitment was hard. And what, at least, an insight that I had was if, if I'm not able to function there, um, if it was really hard for me to to go back to, because again, I don't think after you experience a burnout, there's no going back, right? You need to really reinvent yourself in terms of an after, right? It's not about
Mhm.
let me fix this that is broken and just restore. It's a really a transformation in terms of your
Mhm.
later, the aftermath of
I
that.
love
You
how you're saying that.
really grow and you become something else. So it was harder there. So I think it was easier to do that process here. It was a little bit less, it was more also related with so many opportunities, so many possibilities. And what was my major thing is I was sitting in a class with people coming from all over the world, and I'm able to represent my country in this space and bring that voice and bringing that sense of representation of my people, I thought was a way of giving them back.
Mm.
So, so I think, that's what also followed later, right? In terms of especially becoming, so for me to reposition myself, in here was towards, and that was my goal of my PhD. I did my PhD to become an academic professor, right? It was not a requirement for licensure back home in Brazil. I already had that, so I did my PhD because that was one of my career trajectories that I wanted to do. And here I am. I went to was in Illinois. I was in St. Louis for 3 years, in Illinois for 3 more years, and here in Florida for 4 years. So, and all in academic or university related positions, which has been great and has exposed me to so much, and I've learned so much. And also in all of these spaces, I'm committed to bringing the Brazilian, and also my trajectory, my learnings, my difficulties, my vulnerabilities, my humanness as well, to these spaces that I bring. So I think especially, even though I think Brazil is a very independent oriented country, even though we might think we're very collective, we are very independent as well, driven. I think especially that interconnectedness, is also something that, especially when you share in terms of the collaboration, it's something that it's becoming more. Yeah, this is what I'm here also for that purpose of bringing more of the importance of that community interdependence and the connected. What connects us from different parts of the world.
Gosh, I love how you're speaking to that, Mariana. And I don't know, it stands out to me how you're describing your journey and process of kind of immigrating here and originally what you had thought you would do and then who you became in the process and what ended up happening. And I don't know, there's so many elements of that that speak to the beautiful and tragic, I guess, complexities of immigration and migration in general, the dilemmas that go into it, the things that become viable. Like you were talking, like several times you referred to my people, and I know, like for myself as an Iranian American, there's pieces of that like really ring true for the Iranian diaspora. It's people, at least with my from my experience, it's a lot about the land and the soil. And I know a lot of like Iranis who've been here for like decades, but they're like, when I die, I want to be buried back in Iran. And it's really about being in the land of Iran. So these dilemmas of like, how do we, how are we connected to each other and to our country of origin, and what it
Yeah.
means even to be connected to the diaspora are such big, beautiful questions. And I wonder, as you're talking, Marina, about the ways that you have this commitment to your people and the ways that they supported your education. And now you're here in the United States, in the world of education, and kind of holding still that commitment to your people. I guess this question kind of came to my mind. It's a bit of an offshoot, and let me know if it's an okay question to ask. Like, from the unique position that you straddle and have access to, what does Brazilian psychology bring that is missed or not seen in US psychology?
Oh,
If that
wow.
makes
I mean,
sense.
that's a great question, especially in the context of family therapy, right? I think I also bring, after specifically, right? I know we are facing difficult times for family therapy in this
Yeah.
country, right? And I think also having being trained in family therapy and being exposed to even this possibility of family therapy being a possibility it wasn't my original intention when I got into psychology because yeah, I want to be a psychologist, but what I mean, the first time that I was exposed that I really saw a family therapist, that's it. I mean, I found it. It was interesting
Yeah.
because and it was the systemic thinking, I think is can or is or the holistic or holism thinking if you it's really it's really helpful and it makes a lot of sense from a collectivist perspective, right?
Uh-huh.
So I think bringing that as well and that voice, and I'm also, I have a lot of bandeiras, right, and a lot of flags that I represent, right,
Uh-huh.
and I'm also in the process now. We can talk I would say my journey now. It's being to deconstruct some of those
Uh-huh.
flags as well. Those has been a core part of my identity, and I'm also facing some dilemmas there and trying to how do I reintegrate and how do I let it go a little as well, right? And how I because I think it also I'm in the process, I would say now as like trying to reduce my ego and trying to challenge my identity and my sense of self in a more fluid, right? Especially with the experience of immigration, which is inevitable, right? Because I say my people, but now my people now also includes American people.
Right. Right.
I recently became a US citizen.
Mm.
And that also has a huge impact in my identity, in my understanding. So bringing a little bit more in terms of what that my people represents, right? My children have been born here, so it's kind of it's a little bit more fluid. So I've also learned to be a little bit more fluid and also not too attached to some commitments, right? I think they can be temporary, they can drive us, but also it's a continuous changing of that. So I think, my Brazilian psychology, family therapy is really bringing the importance of the group, the importance of the
Mhm.
family, right? Of the couple, of the relational. So looking at the relationships instead of the individuals. What is wrong with the individuals, but looking more at the dynamic. This is something that I believe Brazil and how even though I think I'm gonna be honest here, my training in psychology was very individualistic centered, except for family therapy, and a few other courses like group therapy, for instance. It's very individual focused.
Uh-huh.
When I was also in the forensic setting, that's when I was much more, I was working along with social workers, right? And here, just learning about the different trajectories, even, right, of these professions. For instance, we don't have a profession of counselor or family therapy in Brazil. We have a psychologist that, can specializes in family therapy, for instance, which was the track that I took. But when working with the social workers, that's when, for me, the cultural part became even more obvious. And I was also faced with a lot of limitations of my own training that it was so focused on the individual. So
Right.
understanding the social power, right? And how it hugely influences, right? Humans, and the importance of community, the importance of, the macro factors and how they are imperative and how they
Yeah.
are, they are in us. it's impossible. So for me now, understanding that we are social beings, I think was also because of that experience with social workers, and also I think it has become even more clear to me um, as a Brazilian, and the cultural piece is something that also, it's
Yeah.
constantly in my, it's very salient to me. It's very, very present.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess I don't want to be too oversimplistic with this question, so let me know what you think. But as you were sharing, I was wondering, like, is perhaps the individualism that you encountered in your training in Brazil in the context of psychology, American culture smuggled in through psychological discourse?
Totally, totally,
Yeah,
totally. I
that's how
think
it's. Yeah.
I think the history, I'm going to be now teaching history and systems of psychology for the first time. I had it in my, in my years in Brazil, but now I'm going to be teaching it. And I'm constantly thinking about that as well. A lot of the discourses of psychology, um, around the world, have been hugely influenced by European and especially American narratives, right, on
Right,
mental
right,
health. Of course, that has been, especially in Brazil. And Brazil, psychology it's a newer profession. So here, has over 100 years. In Brazil, it's less than 100. Was in around 70s, I think. So we are, I would say, around 50 years age, psychology. So I would say within that process, of course, we imported the models from what was already taught, right? Psychology, didn't become psychology from within, right? It was exported,
right,
and of course, it did impact it. And there's a huge, especially when you think about, the translations, right? Or when you're trying to, that process of adapting interventions to a new culture. It's not only about language. It's
right,
not only about translating the language, but it's really about understanding culture, right? And
yeah,
what is relevant and what is effective for different experiences, for different ways of understanding the world, the life, right, through many different ethics lenses as well. So I agree with you, and I've been exposed somewhat. I would say, for instance, for sure, it was I would say the American discourse in psychology is imperative, at least back then. I'm sure it has changed tremendously more now, especially with more social movements and cultural awareness. And there's some resistance more now, even in science in Brazil, like in terms of, we don't only import things, right? We also want to create and generate
right,
knowledge within, and that has been done a lot as well. But unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge has been only majority of them. Of course, now they're trying to translate more towards English to become more accessible, but usually it's more within the language. So the importance of translating to other languages as well, to kind of trying to influence back as well. So that's kind of
right.
my perspective, or trying to.
Yeah, no, it's beautifully complicated. And I guess as you were sharing about it, I was thinking about some of my experience with because the site that I work at is with Middle Eastern refugees, and it's a very, yeah, I guess to use that same language, like a collectivist kind of perspective. And so the self is located in the family system, and any problems and work necessarily is understood through the family perspective. It's very hard to articulate this to Americans because it's such a felt sense. I don't know. I try to like speak it and intellectualize it, but it's so much more than that. And it's interesting because I've been doing that work since like 2011 or 2010, so it's been a while. And I would hear, especially in the context of AFTA, about some of the challenges to family therapy, like you're saying, like you'd say difficult times for family therapy. And it wasn't until I like got my private practice going and started working with insurance that I kind of got this like really material sense of the dire state of family therapy in that, generally speaking, I could get paid about, let's say from insurance, about $130 for an individual session, but $90 if I bring in a family member or a patient. Sorry.
Oh, wait,
Uh,
the family as a patient, right?
yeah. if I do any work that's more than one person in a room, the pay decreases significantly.
That's
And I don't really
insane.
understand it. I
That's
couldn't explain
insane.
it. And so it kind of like made really visible this issue to me. And then it also was kind of funny too. Well, funny, I'll have trainees who come into the to License to Freedom, the site that I work at, and sometimes influenced by this kind of commercial model of therapy where it's like, hey, kind of give me like, I want some relational therapy clients. And I'm like, well, I, I don't know how to sort out relational clients for you, like some sort of like kind of shopping type context where these are relational, these are individuals, these are couples. It's like, we're family therapists, get in the work, and family therapy may happen. And often, actually, it's always been the case that they get a ton of relational work because the families that come in, they kind of come in individually, test the waters, test the therapist, and then everyone kind of follows. Um, and then I guess I'm using that to contrast my experience with like American context too, where I kind of have to like almost force people to bring in family members. I mean, I don't force, it's consensual, of course, but like really push maybe the usefulness of that. So I don't know if this reflects your experience at all, Mariana, but just that's where my head was going as you were kind of sharing some of your ways of appreciating, if I heard you right, like the ways that in Brazil, like, yeah, it's kind of this collectivist, family driven context in which family therapy makes sense. And then it intersects with the imposition of Western psychological ideas that individualize experience.
Yeah, and I think where you're saying, especially in terms of, I'm thinking about the power of judgment, right? Especially when you are in a different cultural understanding, right, or bias that the self is located within individual, right? The idea of the self being located in the family becomes fusion, right? Becomes dependence, right? Becomes a person that is not able to have
Right.
a sense of independence in who they are, right? And that has been another area of me that I've been studying differentiation of self, also among collectivist culture as well, to understand it from a more multicultural perspective. I think you're also bringing the layers of systems, right? If the insurance and again, determines that the individual is the gold standard, right? And that it's, and then the silver is family. It also provides, what is being considered
Yeah.
and what is the power of that,
Yeah.
right?
What's being incentivized?
Yeah, and the power decisions that plays a role into, also I would say fail family therapy in this country as well, which is really hard to consider, especially if you think about, working with collectivist cultures as you do and as I do, emphasizing the individual. It also, again, it fails the family once more, right? It failed the individual because we're not also including or considering that.
Yeah. So going back to your original story, like how a whole system of people can collectively become a set of individuals who can mm, kind of fail to support each other and individuals that are kind of seeking our services.
Yeah, yeah.
Marian, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today and hear some of your ideas and kind of the things. I just appreciate how much your perspectives feels like, if this language is okay, like that straddling of multiple contexts and multiple languages and like what that kind of makes visible that's maybe obscured for those of us who are don't have that privilege of kind of a multicultural, multilingual, multi-citizenal, if I could use that word, context. If
Yeah,
folks
yeah.
if folks want to connect with you, Mariana, or kind of follow with your reading and I'm sorry, with your writings and stuff like that, where might you direct our
Yeah,
audience?
I'm in LinkedIn, I would say. My email, I can put it, available in the podcast as well. My personal email, my professional email as well,
Yeah.
if they want to. Yeah, and I mean join AFTA as well, right? I'm a member
Yes.
of AFTA, and that might be a good way also to find me.
Yeah. I've had the privilege of meeting folks like yourself through AFTA. So it's a great context to encourage folks to do that. Well, Mariana, thank you so much for joining me in this kind of sharing your wisdom to us. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate, say my wisdom. I'm learning, right? And I think that's another, maybe the final thing. We all have wisdom, right? We all have knowledges, and sometimes they're not even within our timelines, right? It's maybe intergenerational knowledge, right? So I do believe in that as well. So I think we need to trust ourselves. You know, trust is trust the process, maybe. But trust ourselves, and also accept the fact that things will be very different than we anticipated or than we expected, and how we integrate that,
Yeah.
right? And how we continue. And I think that's how we continue to stay connected and to learn from one another, to share from one another. So I think bringing that attunement, right, to the community is something that I think it's important for us to continue instilling. Don't think that we are alone in that
Yeah.
process, but we can count on each other. So I really appreciate this time, the opportunity to share and to connect, right, with you, with many other people listening. And yeah, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Mariana.